Let's get to the story of the day. I left my body and flew to a calm spot, as if in the gravity of the first level, before commencing an escalation into the gravity of life. It was pitch black. I spoke with several creatures who told me that I was in a total and important transformation, but that I could ascend further and speak with someone who would decide whether or not I would return to my body. They said that the higher that I went, the more incredible the experiences would be, and the likelihood of returning would decrease. The same beings who were speaking to me now were likely to bring me back. It was like a train station full of chattering individuals, and the colors in that dimension were brownish. Further distant, there were grayish creatures who were assisted by guides in leaving their terrestrial life. Aside from the tones of black and brown to white, there was no genuine color. On Earth, I saw people I knew who greeted me and began their ascent. The guides warned me that I was on the verge of death. I wondered if those who were dying and abandoning their bodies realized where they were. The guides that accompanied me were nice, tactful, and very accommodating, but they were opaque when some questions were asked, and when they did, they merely smiled. They spoke by telepathy and knew exactly what I was thinking, but their responses were vital, brief, and certain. My guides were plain, peaceful, and had a gentle sense of humor. The trial began at that point. They saw everything as obvious, and they helped me grasp all the inconsistencies, behaviors, guilt, and non-guilt that I was experiencing as a result of my life's experiences. They comforted and calmed me with exact words. Then I had the impression that I was still in a misty area close to Earth. They informed me that I may choose to continue, but that there was a maximum risk to my physical body or life. Then in the earthly sphere, connecting with my Diego ego, I agreed to continue because the guides were willing to accompany me. I was concerned because of the danger. Nonetheless, I accepted quietly and respectfully, despite the haughtiness of my Earth personality, which desired the experience. At the same time, my cosmic conscious enabled me to make the decision without feeling rushed. We suddenly began to ascend at breakneck speed, with no friction or effort, as if falling yet ascending. I was in a state of reverberation, hearing a zooming sound and feeling dizzy, as if I were in a fast car. The guides then appeared to vanish. I realized my panic at the time. I questioned my ability to deal with the circumstance. Suddenly, with a cacophony of voices, I began to judge, blame, and make decisions that belonged to their own code of life. Everything was valid and excusable at the time because it was acknowledged that my own position was little and humble. Other recommendations that sounded more valid were humbly accepted because there was no true shame in the deep. After a flurry of cultural, legislative, and spiritual ideas exploded within me, the guide's response was in transcendence, which they uttered with a smile. All of the actions I thought were crucial were not. My mind was suddenly allowed to rest in a tranquil spot in order to continue ascending through a translucent tunnel with a light that appeared to have a yellowish opacity. Then I noticed a slew of beings, some climbing and some lowering. Two of them were familiar to me in the Earth plane, and I hadn't seen them in over 20 years. I also encountered folks who were unknown to me at the time and whom I met many years later in their earthly bodies. I questioned one of the two people I did know what he was doing there, and he told me that he had a really bad health problem and almost died, but the physicians had already fixed the health problem. This is why he was returning to his body. Nonetheless, I was told that another person who had been a family friend for many years was leaving the Earth realm in a certain way. Then came some guides to convey the sick companion back to Earth via a tubular shape in descent. I also saw another tubular shapes through which other spirits were ascending, including a lady familiar to me and my family whose body had perished. I inquired whether the lady could return, but they stated her time was over and she had departed her body. I could feel the lady's energy being disturbed since she was bewildered because she didn't realize she was dead, but I avoided meeting her. My guides grinned at that moment. A new lap began, with the way being transparent, silent, and cooperative. I enjoyed having my conscience at ease, as well as the compassionate but distant company of the guides and other entities I couldn't see. Suddenly, another path revealed, and all the deceased members of my family, including my father, appeared. I then entered another stage, briefly unconscious but rapidly recovered. It seemed as if I'd been through a purifying sauna, descending into sleep, yet I quickly realized my consciousness was still intact. I realized I'd taken a risk with no return, and in contrition, pleaded to be allowed to return because I knew I had already crossed the threshold of death. Everything was brighter in that location, though not by much. Only the identification of my loves from my family on Earth seemed to urge me to return to my body. I then felt a little but vital sense of unease and agony since I realized I'd crossed the threshold again, so I asked my guides for an explanation. They told me that the decision was no longer in their hands because we'd entered regions beyond their control. I was taken aback by the response. I asked them if they could stay accompanying me since I wanted to talk to someone, and they graciously agreed. I felt abandoned by nostalgia. I afterwards had the impression that they had taken my hand. We suddenly shot out at a huge, cold, mentholated speed with sharp cosmic sounds, clear and deep echoes, and the brilliance of a light. So white, almost metallic, that made me feel like we were flying within an appealing and refreshing wind. There were warm and wonderful odors, and then there was fog, and I saw the guide standing on a flat floor. An extremely golden, dazzling creature emerged from the white fog, an androgynous person emitting a brightness as bright as the sun, but not harming my vision. The figure was clearly defined and began approaching me, expanding in size as it got closer, until it was slightly larger than myself. My intellect was incapable of comprehending such free satisfaction and wonder from such a gorgeous human. I almost lost consciousness, merging with him in that overwhelming sensation. This caring being consoled me. With only a thread of conscience remaining, I turned to my guardians and said that I profoundly appreciated them for this incredible experience, but that I had to return to Earth plane to complete disappointing duties. They said that my life would continue, albeit as painful as it had been, with only a few accomplishments, and that it would only last for the time that fate had planned. Almost nothing could be changed from the original plan. I lingered before this lovely person that transcended me, of whose I felt a small part within me, and whose gentle and definite response I awaited. I turned around and faced the being of light directly, about half a meter away. He was a being of incredible power, beauty, and energy, but I couldn't see his face. I had the impression that doing so would be the same as remaining. Suddenly, the entity embraced me in an infinitely sensitive and noble embrace that I cannot express. I realized and thanked him since anything was now feasible, including declining to stay because I had reasons to return to Earth. I watched in awe as he stretched his right arm. There was a dark gap between us, which I could jump over if I grasped his hand, but no return was imaginable. He assured me I was free to make my own decision, an offer for which I thanked him and smiled. I leaned back and inhaled the beautiful and invigorating air. The being of light, who stared at me with recognition and content, slowly descended his hand and disappeared, shrinking with each step. He was a being of unconditional love, wisdom, light, and energy. The guides reappeared, curious and courteous, eager to take me back. I jumped and tumbled down at breakneck speed, feeling like a flame. I couldn't take the friction or the terrible noise any longer. I accepted that I would rather die than endure the experience at its peak of friction and sound. To my surprise, the guardians advised me telepathically in luminous words to relax since I will be there shortly. I then felt an eruption of white and red marmalade and traveled through it in the opposite direction of its flow. I finally collapsed, a dry and heavy fall weighing tons, to find myself seated on my bed, eyes open and blazing. I felt a tremendous pain near my heart, almost intolerable discomfort, and great trouble breathing. My body was stiff. My arms were immobile. My feet were also frozen, and I couldn't move them. I could only get a few threads of air into my lungs before they stung. I was disoriented, and the ache in my chest was still severe. I was unconscious for a moment, but once I could move my waist, I closed my eyes and fell asleep. I was still zooming and hearing internal and external noises. For an hour and a half, the ache in my heart was excruciating. I made it to the bathroom, despite feeling as exhausted as I'd ever felt. I then went back to sleep for 12 hours. When I awoke, I remember the guides telling me how my wife, daughter, and I would die. I saw my entire future and the future of my daughter. I was informed that I would only recall bits and pieces of it. The advisors assured me that my life would continue to be miserable, but with minor rewards. It had to be that way because it was programmed to be that way, and the goal, while terrible, was incredibly beneficial and evolutionary. I was unable to change it.